everybody. It's that time of the week. It is time for PropertyLens presents Property of the Week. For those of you who don't know, I am Bob Frady, co-founder of PropertyLens, and with me,
John Sigmund, president and co-founder of PropertyLens.
John, where are we going to today?
We are looking at a property that one of our friends is in the process of buying for his son, who will be attending Boise State University and having to sit through many losses to the San Diego State Aztecs.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll see about that. So here we are, beautiful 1616 South Oakland Avenue in Boise, Idaho. It is single-family residential. You know, this is one thing that a lot of people overlook when looking at homes is what's the use code of the land? And sometimes people are surprised to find out that it's not a single-family residence, it's a condo, or it's something, or it's agricultural. That means something when you're buying a house. But this one, A-OK, single-family residence, 2 bedrooms, doesn't report the number of bathrooms. I'm going to assume there's a bathroom in there somewhere. 928 square feet. And so now what happens when we generate this report is it reaches out to our 30-odd data sets that we manage and use and build, pulls them all together, presents the data, but also runs it through a series of AI and a series of rules to come up with the questions that you should ask before you make an offer on this house. So, John, the first set of questions we come up with is called the buyer lens. You're thinking about buying this house. Here's the questions you should ask. What are some of the questions you should ask for this property?
Well, some of the questions you should ask about this property, first of all, the roof. It looks great. However, the best guess we can give you is 29 years of age. 29 years of age is probably either right at or close to the end of life for a shingle roof up in Idaho. And so if it looks great, but it's old, there's a question there. And the question is, has this roof ever been replaced? And if it has, why wasn't a permit pulled? Now, it might be you don't need one. Lots of rules, different places. They may have done it themselves, may have been done under some other permit, not necessarily called out. But that would be the first thing that you'd want to find out is, the roof looks great. Could it really be 29 years old? Probably not. So let's find out about the roof.
Ask the seller. Our job is to tell you everything we can find, but also to turn that into questions to make sure that you uncover this before you make the offer. So if you're looking at this house, it's like, hey, has the roof been replaced? Because it looks like it's in great shape. It's 29 years old. Not that 29-year-olds can't be in great shape, but 29-year-old roofs, on the other hand, approaching the end of their life. So
I declare something yet.
All right, what we got next?
We have construction permits. 3 have been closed, or 2 have been closed. 1 has not been closed. It may still be open. Need to find out about that because if you go to do any work that does require a permit, sometimes you end up closing permits that you don't know about that are still open because they just didn't take the last step. Slows down your project. You don't want that to happen. Get rid of these things up front, have it taken care of. This is an interesting one. There are a lot of sex offenders in this neighborhood.
24 within a half mile. Holy cow. This is like sex offender central.
Kid going to college? Probably not the biggest issue. Moving in with a small family? Probably an issue. So, they're registered. We know where they are. You should know where they are. Helps you in making the decision. Water heaters, you definitely want to check on when it was last replaced. We've got a permit that says a long time ago. They don't last that long. So somebody replaced it, may or may not have pulled a permit, may or may not have been required to. You want to find out about that. Furnace appears to be 5 years old, and that's thanks to the permit data. So furnace lasts 15, 20 years, not something you're going to have to normally concern yourself with, at least for the time being. Property has an unfinished basement, so lots of issues with basements, leaks and foundations and cracks and all of that good stuff. You definitely want to get it inspected. It is in a higher crime area. It is near the campus. Campuses tend to have higher crime with a transient population and, plenty of people living in more densely packed areas. Stuff happens.
A lot of times it's stupid crimes. Like my son lives in Santa Barbara at the university, and one night this kid got drunk and decided to throw his bird scooter through my son's windshield. I'm like, it's a crime, but yet people go, it's a safe area, but it's still a lot of crime because there's a lot of stupid crime, especially around college campuses. A lot of petty burglaries, a lot of stuff like that. So there is high crime in this area. You want to make sure you get the ring cameras out or, get a security system on the place.
A leaking underground storage tank identified nearby. No big deal, unless you've got, you're pulling groundwater or you're gonna, if you start shooting at something and up comes bubbling crude, it's not really bubbling crude. It's just seeping from an underground storage tank. And no solar panels on this property. It would take a considerable time to get them paid back. Probably not a good option here.
Have you had frozen pipes in the past? All of this, it's a combination of here's what's happened and we're not sure what happened. So let's ask these questions so you, as the buyer, can make sure what happened. So the second thing we have on our lovely list is what we call the inspector lens. Now, let's say you've made a decision to make an offer on a house and you want to get it inspected. Sometimes you have to waive the inspection contingency, but you still want the inspection. And sometimes you don't. So the inspector works for you. Even though they're referred by the seller, usually, or the buyer's agent, they work for you. So what you do is you print out this list and you hand it to them and say, make sure you give these things a once over so I know that these are taken care of. So for example, we don't really know the life of this roof. We think it's 29 years because nothing else indicates that it's not. You got to check the roof on this house. Now that may be an extra cost. Maybe the inspector doesn't normally climb up on the roof, but you want to find out what the age of the roof is. You want to check and make sure that the construction permits have been closed. Like John said, it can lead to more problems down the road or unexpected expenses down the road. Usually more of a pain in the neck kind of a thing when a bill turns up for an unclosed permit. It says that furnace and HVAC was upgraded. Probably the water heater was upgraded, but there's nothing to indicate it. So you want the inspector to check that, check the furnace, check the basement, check for signs of crime. Are there Jimmy marks on the door? Look for any evidence of prior leaks from frozen pipes. And the underground storage tank, there's not a lot you can do about that. And then finally, we have our insurance lens. And John, what does the insurance lens tell us?
Insurance lens tells us what an insurance company looks at when they determine your rate and what you can do about it and what you should at least at a minimum insure the property for. You saw our last episode with Todd Rissell from E2 Value talking about replacement costs. This is one of the houses that falls into the 70% or the 30%, one or the other, where the price of the property is significantly greater than the replacement cost. In this case, if you insure the property for the 429,000 or so that they're asking, you're definitely going to be covered should something really bad happen and you need to replace the property. I think it's 40% at least of properties in the US are underinsured. You don't want to be that person. Property is 29 years old, which, as we all know, is new for New Hampshire, but is actually decently aged for Boise. But it's over 10. Properties that are older have to, should something bad happen, get updated to code. That definitely costs more. It's in a high crime area. Crime, interestingly, is not typically taken into account for a residential policy, but it is something that you should definitely be aware of. And where this is a commercial property, it would be taken into account. And then, the roof, again, back to the roof. There are insurance companies who will only insure a roof for replacement value up to the first 10 years. You need to know this because somebody's going to ask the question when you go to insure the property.
We've been seeing more and more stories about even houses in this price range, insurance companies just saying no because the roof is too old. So one of the things you want to check out when looking at this is really get a handle on what that roof age is and be able to verify it. Because when you go to the insurance company, they look up tools like this that say, how old is this roof? And someone says 29 years, they're like, we're not going to insure it. Just too much risk. And so you want to make sure that either that roof gets replaced when you buy it or before you buy it, or you prove that this roof has been updated in the past. Because insurance companies aren't joking around anymore. If you got an old roof, they're not going to insure it in many, many places. Okay. And we got the features and constructions overview. This is the stuff that you can see on the multiple listing services and online. You got public water. You don't have a pool. You do have a perimeter fence. Modest, fair construction quality. And it's in Boise City. Here's the most recent listing detail in February 28th of 2025, which was just a couple weeks ago. It was listed for $379,000. We think the fair market value is probably somewhere around $340,000, but it's not outrageous to ask for $379,000. There's a variation. There's a variability in there, and it tells you in here it's got information about the property that you might not see in some of the other data. Talk about ownership. What's it telling us here?
Well, the ownership history is telling us it's not a flip.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, if you see a lot of activity 6, 12, even 18 months prior, that's something that you're going to want to bring up. So I was looking up a friend's house down in Dallas and pointed out, your previous occupants were there for only like 8, 10 months. Was this a flip? And he's like, no, they got divorced.
Which is a flip of another kind.
Yes, it's a flip of another kind. But but you want to know because, I'm not saying that all flips cut corners or, might do unpermitted work. Maybe that's where the roof came from. Who knows, right? But those are things that you would definitely want to be alerted to. We definitely alert you to that. In this case, there's been long-term ownership. It's not just a buy it, use it, make it look pretty and send it on its way type of house.
It's probably the original owner. So, because there's nothing to indicate that anybody else owned it since it was sold, since it was first built. Got property tax history. Looks like taxes actually went down a little bit in 2023 for this location. I'm not sure how it reassesses when you buy a property in Boise. But if you notice from 5 years ago, taxes have gone up about 20%. And that's something you want to keep an eye on because your mortgage might stay the same, but your insurance and tax costs can raise every year. Lovely, lovely place. Got some pictures. Looks nice. It's got a little backyard. And then we look at the aerial imagery and the roof span data and the roof condition data. So here we show, to the best of our knowledge, from all the information that's available, this roof is probably original to the house, which means it has about a year left on its life. It's made of shingles. It's going to cost about $5,900 to replace that roof. Given construction costs, it might be slightly more, it might be slightly less, but we always err on the high side because replacement costs just keep going up and up and up. However, the condition's great. It's in really good condition. It's got low exposure. So yeah, you could maybe this could last another 5 years, but you want to be aware that at some point you're going to need to replace this roof. When we look at damaging events, don't have any for this location, which is great. Very calm area. Some places you'll see 50 or 60 things with high winds or hail. Don't see anything here. Now, if you're curious about the roof, go back to 2020 and the roof looks exactly the same. So maybe something has happened. They've added the storage container in the back. All right. So now we get down to permits. This is a new section of our PropertyLens report released just this week, which is the requirements in Boise. And so building permits are required in Boise. For major things like new construction, additions, alterations, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical work, it's all required. Some minor repairs aren't. So if there's work that's done and there aren't any permits, one of two things has happened. The first is we didn't have the permits because not every municipality makes them available. It's rare, but it happens. And the second is that the work was never permitted. And if the work wasn't permitted, then, you want to ask why. So, John, why don't you walk us through the permits that we see here?
Sure. So if we take a look, storage container permit, a lot of people will use a pod or something similar like that when they're having a lot of work done on site because you can store the appliances in it, you can store the equipment, materials, things like that. Um, Depends upon where you're at if this is required. This is a pretty unique permit. I've not seen this one before. But appears that if you have one hanging around for a while, you gotta have a permit to have it hang around for a while. Um, Electrical permit, they probably upgraded the box, took care of a few electrical items that could have also been tied to other changes on the property, running a line. I think in this case, if I read into this correctly, this was actually a repair because a branch or something took the lines actually out of the house, which is not something you really want to have happen, but in areas where you have above ground lines, certainly something you could face. The mechanical permit talks about the furnace and air conditioning, gives you an idea of what the cost was. Not too bad, but it's a small property, so you have smaller units, so that's not too surprising. You've got a plumbing permit issued, more mechanical permits, another electrical permit, and that's going back to the original construction of the
Yep,
house.
that's the original
So
construction permits.
you can see pretty detailed information. And the benefit of it is a lot of times you'll be able to find out who actually did the work by who pulled the permit and how much you spent. So if you liked what they did and you want them back, or if they did something wrong and it's recent and you want them back to repair it under warranty, having the permits list is a great way to find that out.
Yeah, that's a big thing when you buy a house and if you don't know the neighborhood, who did the work? And, I know when I bought my house, I had no idea who did the work. Then I see the permits, like, there it is, there it is, there it is. I know exactly who did the work. So if I like the work that was done, I go back and call them again, and they'll come up and say, I worked on this house before. I'm like, yeah, I know. I saw the permit. We don't have homeowner service history in here because that's a future ad. We don't have inspections, not because there hasn't been an inspection, but because, again, we don't have it. But then we can look at upkeep and property ownership costs and like electricity. One of the big questions is how much does it cost to heat this place? And buyers go nuts. They're like, I don't want to pull my electrical bill, so we estimate it, and we see that it's very modest electrical cost for this location. It's like $50 a month. It's Idaho Power, and your annual consumption is around $700. If you want to get service, we'll link you out to Idaho Power. If you want to talk about solar, you can click on this button and we'll send you to a place that talks about solar. This is the carbon footprint of the utility. And hydroelectric power is the main driver of power here. Very clean. Wind, solar, hydro, natural gas, very clean um, utility. Okay, risk assessment. What do you got here, John?
Well, and the risk assessment, really, the winter risk is your biggest cause, as we saw frozen pipes, plus a few other things that are associated with places that are cold. Drought, pollution, volcano. Yeah, there is a volcano. It's called Yellowstone. It's, probably the big one. If that goes, all bets are off. Earthquake, you're going to get a little shaking up there, nothing to write home about. But everything else is really very, very modest. And, while everybody thinks the whole world's going to burn in a wildfire, this house is not.
Yep.
No tornadoes either.
There's really there's no Fs on here, which is very unusual for a property to have something that's as clean as this. Yeah, some winter risk. It's Idaho, but I thought it would be worse, and it's not. Up next is flood. Always important to know what your flood risk. Now, there are those of you who will say that, especially if you believe in Noah's Ark, that any place is subjected to flood, and that's entirely possible. There's no disrespecting of that argument. However, FEMA measures what your probability is, and we display that on here. You're not in a 100-year flood zone. You're not in a 500-year flood zone. Flood insurance is not required for this property, nor is it recommended for this property because you're just too far away. All right. So yeah, the winter score, then here's the risks spelled out a little bit more. Jordan Craters is the nearest field. I'm not even sure if I don't even know where that is, but that's the nearest one. And lots of, relatively mild data. And then how about environmental pollution, John?
Environmental, you've got, as we mentioned before, that leaking underground storage tank. It is an area that has some moderate radon. Since it does have a basement, you would want to make sure that it is tested. And if it comes back bad, you want to have somebody put in a mitigation system if there is not one there. Even if there is one there, you still want it tested because the systems are supposed to be tested every other year just to make sure they continue to work. Other than that, there's really nothing to write home about.
Yep. Yep. This is environmentally, this is a very mild location. Um, Insurability and claims. We don't have any insurance claims on this property. Doesn't mean that there aren't any. It's just that we don't have them. So you may want to check with your local insurance agent, because, and we'll get to this part, but you're going to want to get an insurance quote before you buy this house, just to make sure you can get insurance for this house.
Well, you should always get your insurance quote before you buy any house, this or any
Yes.
others.
Yeah. And then if there's claims, they can tell you whether there's been claims on the house. So here's the factors that go into it. Crime is a factor. And then if you want to get a quote, you can click here, go see a quote. We don't show claim history. And then finally, the fun part of our show. Here's something that I would bet you $10. We go 10 times the normal bet of $1. I bet you
No,
$10 that the listing agent or the selling agent isn't going to tell you this, which is that this is
most
an elevated.
likely not.
Yes.
Um, again, it's a transient population. It's college kids. It's people that are less likely to actually, make a claim or write a report or do any of the things associated with it. And so it's a natural place for stuff like this to happen. And it can be a lot of low level crime that happens. And so, crime is a exceptionally variable statistic. And what I mean by that, it's updated every year. Crime does not have a longevity like, hey, if there have been 10 tornadoes in this area in the last 10 years, we can pretty much guess what's going to happen in year 11. There's going to be another tornado. Crime is not like that at all because you can immediately influence crime by increasing police patrols, and then crime goes down. So we definitely update every year. In this case, it's from the most recent statistics, and it's a college campus nearby area. That's what it is. With probably lots of college campus, housing going on.
Yeah,
Um,
if you like this house, I don't think there's any reason to panic over the crime score, but there is definitely a need to protect. So get your camera system of choice. Get an alarm if you don't have one on the property. It just safety first. Uh, Listen, if your kid's 6'3", 250 and fearless, then it doesn't really matter where you put them. But other kids, they want to make sure that the parents want to make sure their kids are safe. In this area, you got to be cautious. And they're never going to tell you that. You're just going to have to figure it out after the kid moves in. So
well, if you
here's,
see a lot of bars on the neighborhood windows, you might have an idea that
yeah,
something
there's
is.
pretty good. There's some crime there. So here's the sex offenders in the area. It is as of 3/3/25. You may want to get the most updated sex offender registry for your state, but we check that and pull it all in. It's got good fire protection, good emergency services, and then finally we get to the timeline so you can see exactly what has happened when. And it's interesting that the permit was pulled for the pod in December of 23. It's not there in May of 24, but it is there in September of 24. It's interesting. It's just curious. And there you go. That is the Property Lens report for 1616 South Oakland Avenue in Boise, Idaho. So, John, now I'm going to take away the cheat sheet. I'm going to say, let's say you were thinking about buying 1616 South Oakland Avenue in Boise, Idaho. What are the top 3 things that you would be looking for?
Okay. Well, as mentioned multiple times, we got to look at the roof. You know, it appears to me, this is just my opinion. I don't believe it's 29 years old. We have no other proof that says that it's not, but I don't believe so because the condition is just too good for that location.
We get into this
For,
argument all the time. It's like, just because it looks
yes,
good doesn't
have
mean
this
it's not old.
argument all the
We
time.
have all the time we have this argument.
So my guess, maybe 5, 6 years old. Find out. See who wins between Bob and John as to the actual age of the road. That would be my number 1 thing to be concerned about. Number 2, it's crime. All right. I want to make sure that the camera of your choice, through the alarm system of your choice, the whatever it happens to be of your choice. If they've got a car, there's no garage associated with this property. Might not be the world's worst thing to put one up. Those would be the types of things that I would be concerned with associated with crime. And then the third thing, you could say winter risks, but there really isn't that much of a third thing. Yeah, the frozen pipes you want to check for, but this is in an area that just really, for the most part, doesn't get a lot of convective storms. You don't get tornadoes or lightning or hail or straight line winds. It's not in a place that's going to be affected by wildfire. It's quite honestly an exceptionally boring property, which is not a bad property to stick a kid in for college.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not, listen, this is not bad at all. So if I were looking at 1616 South Oakland Avenue in Boise, Idaho, here are the top 3 things I would look for. Number 1 is, can I get insurance on this house the way it's currently constructed? I would call an insurance agent, a local insurance agent, and say, give me a quote. And the reason is because of number 2, which is the roof. Increasingly, insurance companies are refusing to insure houses with old roofs because they just cause so many problems. Ice dams and leaks and all sorts of stuff like that. Now, Boise is pretty quiet environmentally, but that's the second thing I would check for, is really, how old is that roof and what condition is that roof in? I would probably ask for a more diligent roof inspection from the inspector. And then the third thing is crime. What's going on, and what is the property doing to protect itself? So are there cameras up? Have there been any break-ins? Are there any signs of forced entry on the property? So those are the big 3. Otherwise, it looks like it's been renovated recently, so it looks pretty nice. And then just to check the age of the water heater as well. That's the 4th thing, I guess. It's just like, it looks like it might have been replaced, but it's not permitted replaced. So just want to check and make sure, because those things wear out. But other than that, it looks like a fun place for a kid to live.
There we go.
All right. Anything else to add there, John?
No, I think we covered it.
I would say this about that. If you're thinking about buying a house, get a Property Lens report, because it will do one of 2 things. It will alert you to things that you need to make sure to avoid surprise expenses. Or number 2, it'll tell you nothing exciting about the house, which is awesome news. Like, hey, I got nothing here. And that's great. It's like a clean bill of health. It's like going to the doctor and they're saying, "Hey, there's nothing wrong with you." And great. Absolutely great. So, for this week's episode of Property of the Week from PropertyLens, I'm Bob Frady.
I'm John Sigmund.
See you next time.